Law enforcement officers are tasked with protecting the legal rights and interests of the citizens of their country, ensuring public order safety, and identifying and stopping any violations. Theoretically, the charter and principles of law enforcement operations sound flawless, but in real life, there are cases that literally make your blood run cold when people, who are meant to serve and protect, violate the law themselves or cover up for those who do. Such wrongful actions often lead to real criminal schemes, resulting in severe consequences. The case of Valeria Vivanco, a police officer who died in the line of duty, gained widespread resonance not only in Chile, where the tragic events unfolded, but also in the media of other countries. Essentially, the young woman's life was ended by a colleague who was supposed to protect her and ensure her safety. The most horrifying aspect was that the higher authorities knew about this and attempted to distort the facts, accusing another person of the incident and hiding the real circumstances of the event. Although the actual culprit of the tragedy was identified and even sentenced to a real prison term, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, whether it was a tragic accident or if it was deliberate. Moreover, it's puzzling why he was covered and defended by high-ranking individuals for so long. Even after it seemed the guilty party had faced punishment, the Supreme Court, upon reviewing an appeal, shocked the victim's family with its unexpected decision. Who was Valeria Vivanco? Valeria Fernanda Vivanco was born on May 29, 1996, in the small commune of La Granja, located near the city of Santiago, the capital of Chile, and was the youngest of 3 children in the simple family of Miguel and Jacqueline Vivanco. She was raised alongside her older biological brother Michelangelo and sister Daniela. The family patriarch worked for a company involved in the transportation of passengers and goods, while her mother was a homemaker dedicated to raising her children and creating a cozy home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate. This was a huge shock for the girl, and although the ex-spouses continued to communicate post-divorce, and the father remained actively involved in the lives of his children from his first marriage, including providing financial support, the youngest daughter harbored resentment towards him. They occasionally argued, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. Miguel Vivanco remarried soon after, and Valeria gained 2 more half-siblings with whom she, as well as Daniela and Michelangelo, maintained warm family relations. Jacqueline never remarried, raised her children, and later took care of her grandchildren, gifted to her by her older offspring. From an early age, Valeria demonstrated a strong-willed character, determination, and incredible perseverance in all her endeavors. She excelled in school, engaged in sports, was courageous and just, and was always ready to help others, sometimes even at risk to herself. It was likely this desire to assist those around her, protect the vulnerable, and stand up for justice that led her to pursue a career in the police force. After successfully completing high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago. She graduated with honors, becoming an investigator, and having received her diploma in 2016 at the age of 20, joined the Chilean police force the following year. She began her service in the bureau investigating especially serious crimes located in the capital. From the first days of her service, young Valeria proved herself to be a dedicated law enforcement officer and a true fighter for justice. She loved her job, performed her duties diligently, and was ready to rush anywhere at any time if required by her service. She could leave in the middle of the night to respond to a crime scene, chased after criminals, risking herself, and sometimes had to act as a psychologist when interacting with people who had lost loved ones. Colleagues described Vivanco as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she was a true professional and a reliable partner. She served in the police force for almost 5.5 years, during which she received a vast number of accolades, awards, and actively advanced in her career, earning the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of the leadership. Additionally, she represented her department in Spain, spending about 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit. She was immensely proud to be entrusted with such responsible missions. By 2020, she had been promoted to assistant inspector, the new young colleague. In January 2020, a new member was welcomed to the precinct where Valeria worked, 21-year-old Leonel Alejandro Contreras Canales. Fresh out of the police academy, Valeria effectively became his mentor at his first job. A few months later, they became partners and initially got along pretty well. Little is known about Lionel's early years. Some information suggests he came from a rather influential and affluent family, but a high-ranking official as his uncle. Growing up in comfort, never wanting for anything, Lionel was quite self-centered, believing everything should go his way. Valeria quickly caught the eye of her new colleague and partner as he made various attempts to show her attention, tried to court her, and even asked her out a few times, but was met with firm rejection each time. Valeria took her job very seriously, considered workplace romances inappropriate, and was quite strict with the young co-worker, seeing him as immature. The issue wasn't so much the age difference, Lionel was only 3 years younger, as it was his behavior, which Valeria found childish but hoped to help him mature. In July 2020, Valeria and her young partner were involved in apprehending robbers who had stolen money from a store's cash register. The criminals, not having left the scene and armed, initiated a shootout, during which both were fatally engaged by Lionel. Although casualties could have been avoided, Lionel's actions were not deemed excessive for apprehending the individuals. However, this incident strained the relationship between the partners. The last birthday. On May 29, 2021, Valeria celebrated her 25th birthday. The celebration took place at her mother's house, attended by many guests including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. Lionel, however, was not among the invited. Valeria, aiming to avoid potential awkwardness, chose not to invite her young partner, who had recently attempted to court her again. Valeria tried to talk to him about this, but he only repeated his affections for her, which she did not want other colleagues to find out about. Despite the large turnout, gifts, heartfelt congratulations, and warm wishes, the birthday girl seemed upset, though she tried to smile. The reason was a recent argument with her father, leading to days without communication. Valeria hoped her father would attend her birthday, allowing them to reconcile, but the likely angered parent only sent a terse congratulatory message, not even calling. Jacqueline noticed her daughter's distress and knew the reason behind her hidden sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she believed Miguel would eventually call Valeria, talk things out, and reconcile as they always had before. Unfortunately, the father and daughter never got the chance to talk again, as 2 weeks later, Valeria tragically lost her life while on duty. The fatal shot. On June 13, 2021, Valeria was on night duty, participating in street patrols and vehicle checks. This was not a standard procedure, but a search for suspects related to the crime against a young woman that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. There was an alert for a white Kia Cerrado, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal. The suspect likely had a weapon and might not have been alone in the car. Valeria was in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Guillardo Araya. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and initiated a pursuit without waiting for backup. The officers managed to intercept and block the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivanco exited their vehicle, weapons drawn, and called for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands up. At that moment, a single shot rang out, and as everyone tried to understand who fired and where, Valeria, clutching her side, fell to the asphalt next to the police car. Reinforcements arrived just then, so her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but couldn't fully grasp what had happened and who had fired. The criminals, seizing the moment of confusion, accelerated and fled the scene while the injured officer was being administered first aid. Despite the rapid arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stem the bleeding, Valeria could not be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought for her life for several hours. However, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, she passed away on the operating table without regaining consciousness. When her family was informed, her parents, brothers, and sisters immediately rushed to the hospital, but by then, the wounded officer had already died. Miguel was not just stricken with grief, but utterly devastated, as he had not had the chance to speak and reconcile with his beloved daughter, with whom he had had a petty argument last. He felt a profound sense of guilt toward her, so shaken by the event that he himself required medical attention to prevent a heart attack. The search and arrest of the suspects. According to the official version, Vivanco died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals. She was hailed as a hero who gave her life for the peace and safety of others. This incident was widely covered in local media, with reporters vividly describing the young officer's heroism and self-sacrifice. The investigation was handled by specialists from the Homicide and Major Crimes Division, where Valeria herself had worked. They concluded that she died from a shot to the abdomen, fired by someone facing her from the direction of the suspect's vehicle she was pursuing with her colleagues. Everything seemed logical, with witnesses corroborating the story, making it appear that the case was solved and all that remained was to find and punish the culprits who were still at large and possibly on the run. Soon after, the suspects were apprehended, generating widespread public attention. The criminals turned out to be 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cañupan and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was withheld due to his minor status, both previously convicted for minor offenses. The then president of Chile, Miguel Juan Sebastián Piñera Echenique, issued an official statement promising that the perpetrators would be brought to justice with all the rigor of the law. Something doesn't add up. After the autopsy and all necessary examinations were conducted, the body of the deceased Vivanco was handed over to her family and was buried with honors at one of the capital's cemeteries. Hundreds of people came to pay their last respects, expressing their sincere condolences to the girl's family. According to Jacqueline and Miguel, the entire ordeal seemed like a horrific dream, and they hardly remembered the events of the funeral day. Among the men carrying Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who appeared to mourn her more than anyone else. However, according to other colleagues, there had been some tension between the partners lately, to the extent that the girl didn't even invite the young man to her birthday celebration. Almost immediately after the funeral, court proceedings began regarding the suspects who were apprehended the day after the incident and were in custody. At that moment, everyone was confident that the culprits were caught, and proving their guilt seemed straightforward, especially since they began to give confessional testimonies. However, it soon became clear that the investigation had been flawed from the start, with critical details overlooked and key findings from forensic experts downplayed. The process was mishandled, and high-ranking officials tried to conceal the identity of the true culprit behind the girl's demise. Thus, about a month and a half after the officer's death, the case took an unexpected turn. By the end of July, 2 employees were suspended from their duties, allegedly involved in the incident leading to Valeria's death. On August 1st, the deceased girl's parents were called to the capital's prosecutor's office for a meeting on an important matter. The parents thought that new evidence had emerged in their daughter's case and that the detainees, awaiting their final sentence, would finally receive deserved punishment. However, the grief-stricken Jacqueline and Miguel were shocked to learn that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. This was personally communicated to them by prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco, who also conveyed his condolences and apologies on behalf of the entire investigative department. Valeria's parents were bewildered. They couldn't believe their ears and couldn't understand how such a thing could happen. They relived their grief anew and wanted clarification on the situation and why this information only became known so much later. As it turned out, that single fatal shot came from the service weapon in the hands of one of the girl's colleagues. This was confirmed by a ballistics examination conducted that same day, but its results were somehow distorted, and the bullet extracted from the body was sent to the evidence locker with entirely different characteristics: shape, caliber, weight, etc. Furthermore, the bullet had exited through and through, and it was not extracted from the body. The entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were accidentally or intentionally confused. That is, the bullet did not enter through the abdomen and exit through the back, but quite the opposite. The shot was fired at her back. Some pages from the autopsy report were missing, while others were clearly altered and replaced. Additionally, the detainees, over whom the trial was proceeding and who supposedly confessed to their guilt and were about to be imprisoned, started filing complaints. They claimed that their confessions were coerced through torture and threats, and the pistol they had on them that evening wasn't even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the earlier crime which prompted the interception plan that fateful night was also unconfirmed. New suspects. In a twist, Vivanco went from being seen as a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to a victim of betrayal, killed by her own colleagues. Given the new circumstances, the primary suspects became Felipe Giliardo Araya, who was driving the police car, and Valeria's partner, Leonel Alejandro Contreras Canales, who was seated in the back. Both suspects were immediately suspended from duty. Thus, on August 5th, it became known that the bullet that killed Valeria was fired from a service weapon. Subsequently, a document emerged with the results of the examination, indicating that only Canales had gunshot residue on his hands, making him the prime suspect. Notably, this finding had not been mentioned anywhere before, as if it never existed. Several other reports concerning the ballistics examination and the pathologist's conclusions were improperly filed and ended up in an archive box, which was never adequately checked. Whether this was an accident, criminal negligence, or intentional concealment of crucial facts was yet to be determined. Now the police officers who participated in the operation to apprehend the criminals themselves became suspects in the murder of their colleague. They, along with the previously arrested perpetrators, took part in a reenactment of the events of that night. Philippe claimed that from the driver's seat he could only see Valeria, who was seated next to him in the front passenger seat and was the first to exit the car. Lionel was sitting behind and also exited the vehicle, but his actions could not be seen by the driver. Valeria had only taken a few steps when a shot was fired. She fell, and the suspect's car they were chasing sped away. Lionel then rushed to the injured woman to provide first aid. Lionel claimed that he and his partner exited the patrol car almost simultaneously, but she immediately rushed forward when the shot was fired. He insisted that he did not shoot his colleague, and the driver should have seen and confirmed this. He also confirmed that he was the first to rush to Valeria's aid and tried to compress her wound. Despite differences in the direct participants' testimonies, the reconstruction showed that Canales was behind his partner at the moment of the shot, and the bullet's trajectory matched his location. He was also the only person found with gunshot residue on his hands. Possible motives for the crime. After previously hidden reports and examination results were released, Lionel was taken into custody as the primary suspect, while the young men previously detained were released under a non-exit agreement, as there was effectively nothing to charge them with. However, the motive behind the young officer's actions remained unclear. The first and main theory was that the entire incident was a tragic accident. Supposedly, the young and inexperienced officer discharged his weapon unintentionally while standing behind his partner. He panicked, tried to help her, and when turning in his service weapon that day, insisted he hadn't fired it. However, the truth quickly surfaced, and influential relatives of the young man, using all their power, money, and connections, attempted to suppress the incident. Hence the cleaned reports, missing documents, confusion in the evidence, and coerced testimonies from the detained. Another theory, partially confirmed by Lionel himself, was that he was unrequitedly in love with Valeria and desperately sought her attention, but all his efforts were in vain. Over time, he began to merely irritate the girl, who didn't even invite him to her birthday party attended by the entire department. The shot in the back was his revenge for the rejection. A third theory, proposed by the deceased's relatives, suggested that Valeria discovered something she wasn't supposed to know, some corruption scheme, official crimes, or something similar. As an honest and fair person, she would undoubtedly have exposed the culprits, which is why she was eliminated, and young Leonel was chosen as the executor, promised that he would remain above suspicion. The second suspect. Despite Canales being taken into custody, suspicions about Philippe were not entirely dispelled. He was armed with identical service weapons, also stood behind the deceased colleague, and could have fired the shot. Moreover, he had previously been disciplined for the unjustified use of a weapon during a criminal arrest, though no one was harmed in that instance. Araya had since been nicknamed the Reckless Shooter. The defense team hired by the relatives to defend Leonel immediately seized this theory, insisting that Philippe accidentally shot the colleague, and since the service weapons were identical, the pistols could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Additionally, the man was inconsistent in his testimony, changing it several times, and later he claimed he could not accurately describe the events of that night, as everything happened very quickly. However, no gunpowder residue was found on the driver's hands, indicating his innocence. In response, Canales claimed that gunpowder got on his hands when he was compressing the wound on the victim's body, and Araya, who also helped the woman, might have washed his hands before the examination. Yet this statement was not credible, as Valeria's bloodstains remained on Philippe's hands, and it's impossible to wash off gunpowder without removing blood. The trial and verdict. The quality of the investigative team's work was once again questioned, and the deceased girl's parents despaired, unsure how to achieve justice. Furthermore, the new turn in the case caused public outrage and led to mistrust in the law enforcement agencies. This story was now covered not only by Chilean but also international media. As a result, many high-ranking officials were suspended from work and soon lost their positions, particularly the head of the Homicide Investigation Department. After additional investigation, Leonel remained the only suspect, with all others excluded from the list and classified as witnesses. In the spring of 2022, he was officially dismissed and remained in custody until the trial's conclusion. The hearings for this case only began in March of the following year, and based on the evidence and witness testimony, the suspect's guilt was fully proven. Initially, the prosecution accused Canales of intentionally murdering his partner and sought the maximum sentence for such cases. However, the accused insisted he would never harm Valeria, as he loved her. Nonetheless, it was from his pistol that the bullet was fired, ending the girl's life. Leonel was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. Following the announcement of the final verdict, the Vivanco family expressed their disagreement, considering the sentence too lenient, while the defendant and his legal team immediately filed a series of appeals. However, the real shock came to Valeria's relatives in February 2024, when the Supreme Court unexpectedly overturned the previously assigned punishment, sentencing the perpetrator to only 540 days of imprisonment, counted from the day of his arrest. Effectively, he walked free from the courtroom. The detective Valeria Vivanco's family, in light of this event, plans to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. In an official statement, the deceased girl's mother said, "The 12-year sentence already seemed too lenient to us, but this is just mockery. I feel as if my daughter has died all over again. I no longer believe in justice. Our family plans to sue the negligent Chilean state, as that's exactly what it deserves." You have to admit that death can sometimes be around every corner, that no one can ever predict where this meeting will take place, in a warm home or on a dark and deserted street, or maybe, which certainly seems unlikely to many of you, even during a family dinner. However, there are exceptions to every story. Kaniong's story is just such a story. Is this really possible? You asked. How could a simple family dinner end in a brutal murder that will shock all Malaysians, and the local authorities will even review the current legislation? Let's take a look at this case. Full name of the heroine, Kenny Ong Lake Yang. She was born in 1974 in the Malaysian city of Ipoh in a large family. And even though the city is considered a rather remarkable place for tourists, but Kenny herself dreamed of something else, a prestigious job, traveling, and what else could a young woman dream of? Of course, all this couldn't just fall from the sky. She had to strive for her dream, and she understood that. First, Kenny graduated from high school with a gold medal, then went to university in Hawaii, where she even got a degree in economics. The beginning was made, and it was necessary to develop further, and she, being already independent, went to Los Angeles, where she got a job in an advertising agency. The City of Dreams gave the young girl self-realization as a specialist in her field. It was there in 2001 that Kenny met Brandon Ong, who, just like her father, was born in Singapore, but left there with his family to America as a child and was now rightfully considered an American. Young Kenny and Brandon got married pretty quickly and moved to the neighboring city of San Diego. But only 2 years into their life together, there was an accident. Kenny's father fell ill with liver cancer. Her father was going to have a serious surgery in Malaysia, and it was not quite clear whether he would survive after such an operation or not. So Kenny quickly packed her things, and on June 1st, leaving her husband in America, flew to her father. Fortunately, the operation was successful. The disease receded. The doctors assured that B-Jen, as Kenny's father was called, would live for a long time and would surely wait for grandchildren. Kenny exhaled with relief. Finally, it was safe to return to her beloved husband and her favorite job. She took a morning flight to Los Angeles, and in the evening, Kenny invited her extended family to a farewell dinner at their favorite restaurant called Monty's, where they had gone on holidays when Kenny still lived with her parents. During dinner, Kenny's mom suddenly didn't feel well, and her caring daughter offered to drive her home. In the parking lot, she looked for a parking ticket in her purse for a long time, and when she couldn't find it, she decided that she had simply forgotten it in the interior of the car. So Kenny asked her sisters to watch her mother and ran to the car. She was gone for a long time. Her mother even decided to go to the car herself, but Kenny's car was not there, and neither was her daughter's. Then one of the sisters started to call Kenny's phone, but it, even more alarmingly, turned out to be switched off. The family knew Kenny very well. She couldn't afford to just disappear, and even if something had happened, she was sure to call and warn her family. But what could have happened in a closed parking lot, literally 300 feet from her family? Kenny's father went to the security guards and asked them to show the security footage. At first, there was nothing strange. His daughter walking toward the car, checking her pockets, looking in her purse for her keys. But then they noticed that behind Kenny there was a stranger moving behind him, and like Kenny, he was slowing down and speeding up. Already from another camera, the guards together with the worried father watched Kenny's car leaving the parking lot. But behind the wheel was a man, most likely the one who followed her in the parking lot, but Kenny herself, strangely enough, was sitting in the passenger seat. It all looked like a kidnapping, and the family immediately called the police. It should be given credit. The Malaysian police began the search for the missing woman as soon as they received information on the stolen car, and in a couple of hours, one of the highway patrol noticed a car on the road, which matched the description. In order not to frighten the possible perpetrator, and at the time, they did not fully understand whether it was a kidnapping or not, the police patrol stopped the car to check the documents. The car stopped. The driver was visibly nervous, but still with a smile gave the policeman his license, and Kenny, who was sitting next to him, tried to give the policeman some signs, but he was checking the driver's documents. Unfortunately, he did not understand it, but the kidnapper paid attention to it, and he pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove away from the patrol car. The police tried to shoot at the trail, but to no avail. The car fled, but they still had the documents of the kidnapper, 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris. Let me tell you a brief biography of this guy. Ahmad was born in 1976, and grew up in Moore, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings in the family. Ahmad Najib studied until the 3rd year of secondary school before dropping out, not continuing the last 2 years of secondary education. Secondary education in Malaysia lasts 5 years because he had to work to feed his family and was a hard worker. In 1998, he came from Muar to Kuala Lumpur. Later, Ahmad Najib was married and had 2 children. According to people who knew him, Ahmad Najib was a man of good character and responsible in his work. And now back to our case. After a while, it turned out that the shooting at the car did not go without result. A young man approached the police and told a strange story. He said that during dinner at a roadside cafe, an unknown guy approached him and said that he was going on vacation with his wife, but on the road he punctured a tire and now they could not go further. The young man gladly decided to help the stranger. They went outside. He took a jack out of the trunk, gave it to the traveler, but he noticed bullet marks on the car, and on the front seat he saw a frightened woman, hardly looking like a wife going on a carefree vacation with her beloved husband. The so-called husband himself did not change the tire, but only fiddled with the jack for a while, grumbled, and gave it back. The police immediately realized that it was Kenny and her kidnapper was Ahmad. However, that was the last time Kenny was seen alive. Kenny Ong, or rather her body, would be found only 3 days later in a sewer manhole near a construction site, almost burned to the ground. As the autopsy will show, the woman was first stabbed in the stomach several times and later strangled. Also, not far from the construction site, will be found in Kemi's car, with a punctured or rather shot tire and with blood stains on the back seat. The police, who had the killer's documents in their possession, for some reason decided to go to the address where Ahmad lived only after the body was found. The amazing thing about this story is that the killer was at home and living a very ordinary life, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not stolen someone else's car, as if he had not kidnapped a woman who had come to visit her father during his illness, and finally, as if he had not driven away from the police officers who were shooting at him. Later, after Ahmad's arrest, forensic tests would prove that in addition to Kenny's blood, Ahmad's own DNA was in the car. We would like to clarify that in Malaysia, murders, especially such brutal ones, are extremely rare. The point is that according to the criminal code, a murderer is entitled to the highest punishment, not even life imprisonment, but the death penalty. It is unclear what Ahmad hoped for, knowing that the police have all the data on him, but he confessed everything and even decided to help the investigation, counting on the fact that it will save him from death. Naturally, the brutal criminal put on the mask of an innocent sheep. At the trial, he said that that night in the parking lot, he was looking for a completely different woman, but mistaken, and realized it only when he was riding with Kenny in the car. According to him, they even laughed together about the situation, and later he tried to get her to have sex with him, and again, according to him, Kenny was not even against it, and the strangulation marks on her neck were just part of the woman's sexual fantasy, which is why she died. A terrified Ahmad decided to dispose of the body and set Kenny on fire. This story was made up from start to finish by Ahmad's lawyers, because in such a case he would have been awarded only abuse of the deceased, or at worst negligent homicide, given that Kenny had asked to be strangled herself during the intimate encounter. And supposedly, if this is not true, if all this is just a fantasy of the defendant, then why the captive did not run away while her captor was changing the tire, the lawyers said. Such a version could sound even convincing, if it were not for the stab wounds in the abdomen. It was at this point that the whole defense fell apart like a house of cards. It was obvious, because the investigation had a different, more reliable, autopsy-confirmed view of what had happened. Ahmad saw a lone woman in the parking lot outside Monty's restaurant and followed her. When Kenny opened her car, he threatened her with a knife, ordered her into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel himself. After that encounter with police officers and a failed attempt to replace a blown tire, he drove the car to a deserted location, put a terrified Kenny in the back seat, and used her several times. Kenny tried to resist, for which she was stabbed several times in the stomach and later strangled with a coat belt. After the abuse, Ahmad took her already dead body outside and threw it into the first manhole, covering it with tires so that it would not be found. He returned to this manhole the next day with several canisters of gasoline and decided to finally hide the traces of the crime, filled Kenny's body with gasoline, and set it on fire. In addition, as it turned out later, Ahmad had 4 rapes against women who fortunately did not die, but still fearing conviction, did not file a police report. Finally, on February 23, 2005, the court, for some reason lasting for several years, finally sentenced the murderer and, among other things, gave Ahmad 10 lashes. But did this make it any easier for the parents who had lost their daughter forever? Being behind bars, Ahmad tried to appeal his sentence and even wrote a letter to Selangor, the head of state, asking him to pardon him, but of course he was refused. And only 13 years after Kenny's murder, Ahmad got what he deserved. On September 23, 2016, he was hanged right in his cell. As I said, this case was quite high profile in Malaysia. Residents were frightened not so much by the brutality of the murder itself, and Ahmad's seemingly empty belief in his impunity, but by the fact that it is not so difficult to kidnap a person in a crowded shopping center, albeit in a parking lot. To prevent this from happening again, the Malaysian authorities began to install as many CCTV cameras as possible around the country, increase the number of security guards in shopping centers, and even made parking spaces specifically for women. And in all this situation, it is very pathetic that for such measures it was necessary to sacrifice the life of an innocent woman who flew to her father for 2 weeks from tens of thousands of miles away. Beauty and the Beast. Perhaps only in movies can women be assassins or hired soldiers. In real life, 8 out of 10 criminals are men, according to statistics. If women do commit violent acts, they usually do so as accomplices or instigators. Alongside the elderly, disabled, and minors, women often appear as victims. They differ from men not only physiologically, but also psychologically. The behavior of the male half of humanity is aggressive and provocative, unlike that of women. Women are more gentle, emotional. They enter a state of hypnosis more easily, are more quickly and strongly affected by anesthetics and psychoactive substances, are more prone to depression, and are more susceptible to deceit and manipulation. A woman is always guided by love, compassion, creation. However, their aspirations are not always shared by the partners they choose for life. This leads to a confrontation of 2 principles, often destructive for the weaker party in the relationship. Whenever something extraordinary happens, such as a disappearance or a crime against life, the entire city or even the country empathetically follows the developments, especially if the crime is publicized and the potential criminal shows no remorse for their actions. This is a story about another mysterious crime against a young woman that shook Orange Beach, Alabama, USA, on the calendar May 19, 2016. The police chief informed Gary Bardwell, the father of the missing Jessie, of the long-awaited news. "I'm sorry, sir," he began. "Today will be a difficult day for your family. Unfortunately, we do not expect to find your daughter alive, but we know where she might be." A team of detectives along with FBI agents set out for a remote ranch in Farmersville, North Texas. The group arrived in the evening and immediately went searching. In the wooded area, law enforcement officers stumbled upon a piece of metal covering something. There was an unbearable smell of decay nearby. However, those who arrived were prepared not only for this, but also for what caused it. Indeed, on the other side of the shield lay a female body, wrapped in a blue sheet. The corpse was covered with a blanket and 2 red-gold towels with bloodstains. A pile of trash mixed with dirt became the improvised gravestone for the unfortunate. It was clear that the perpetrator was an amateur, as trying to hide the result of their actions, they made it more noticeable. The condition of the body was terrible. After a week under the scorching sun, it had significantly decomposed. Experts needed 7 days to officially identify the victim. For this, dental records of the presumed victim were requested. As the investigation suspected, the discovered body belonged to 27-year-old Jessie Bardwell. The examination showed that the young woman's death was the result of a crime. However, the exact cause could not be determined as the body was too decomposed. Notably, an unknown informant pointed to the location of the woman's remains. Their name was not disclosed until the end. Jessie Bardwell, a beloved daughter and friend, seemingly vanished from the home she shared with her boyfriend named Jason Lowe. Sensing trouble, Gary set off from Mississippi to Texas in search of his child. His instincts were correct. His girl had indeed been in danger for quite some time. But let's start from the beginning. It must be said that the father-daughter relationship was exceptionally strong. Gary recalled being deeply moved at the moment of Jessie's birth. She was so fragile and vulnerable that his heart melted and never belonged to him again. Jessie was born on September 10, 1988, in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Gary and Carla Bardwell were wonderful parents, and besides their daughter, they raised a son named Brandon. The siblings got along well, with the older brother always protecting his little sister from bullies. Grandma Kitty, who adored her grandchildren, was a frequent visitor. She read books to them, shared life stories, and invented various games. In short, they were the quintessential American family. Jessie herself was a joyful, cheerful, and kind girl. She had a unique style that set her apart from her friends. She dreamed of making it in the beauty industry and opening her own salon. When Jessie was 14, the family unit broke down. The Bardwells divorced. When it came time to choose whom to live with, the girl chose her father. Their relationship was warm and trusting. Gary worked as a firefighter, so Jessie often called him to check on him and ensure everything was fine. Over time, the man remarried. However, the stepdaughter and stepmother got along well. Gina was an excellent homemaker and took care of everyone in the household. Jessie understood that her father was happy and not alone with such a woman by his side, which was very important to her, since she would eventually leave the nest. After finishing school, Jessie decided to become independent, so she moved to Orange Beach, Alabama. To support herself, she worked as a waitress at the popular beachfront restaurant Cobalt. Gary remembered how she loved being near the water. It calmed her. Father and daughter kept in constant touch, exchanging messages. When he visited, they would go boating and fishing. Kimberly Esbury, the restaurant manager and Jessie's friend, learned that Jessie's father was a talented musician. Upon retiring, he devoted more time to his passion, honing his skills. As a result, he was often invited to perform at the establishment, and even had his own table there. Kimberly later admitted to admiring the relationship between Jessie and her father. They were true friends. Jessie was always present at his performances. The tips she earned went towards college and her dream. At work, she met a young man named Terry Ellis, also a waiter. They started dating after some time. Their relationship was steady and serious. They seemed like a harmonious couple. However, at one of the social events, Jessie was taken by his friend Jason Lowe. Her sudden infatuation surprised everyone. It seemed she was head over heels in love with him, oblivious to everything else around her. After explaining her sudden feelings, Jessie and Terry parted as amicably as they had met. Nonetheless, this decision turned her life upside down by 360 degrees. The new boyfriend was undoubtedly handsome and promising. He had 2 degrees and a decent job. Jason knew how to present himself and was polite. However, for Jessie, the new feelings were also a ticket to a new life. When he heard about his beloved's dreams, he promised to fulfill them. Eventually, the young man needed to transfer to Dallas, Texas. Then, Jessie followed him. The new position in the technology industry promised Jason a high-paying job. Kimberly shared that Jessie saw the move more as an adventure than something that could fundamentally change her life. She certainly didn't want to part with her father for long and hesitated for a while. However, ambition and youthful idealism prevailed. She did all this in secret from Gary. She was very afraid of disappointing her father. knowing he would be against it. Therefore, she didn't tell him even when they spent their last Christmas together. Mr. Bardwell noticed nothing unusual in his daughter's behavior. She was as happy as usual, laughing and joking. So, the 24-year-old found herself in Richardson, a suburb of Dallas. Jason worked from home, while Jessie searched for a new job and scouted locations for her salon. The couple planned to marry and buy a house. However, Jessie's relationship with her father underwent a drastic change. They grew distant. The daughter stopped answering his calls. Mr. Bardwell was troubled by this uncharacteristic behavior. After speaking with Kimberly, he learned about Jessie's new boyfriend and her move to another state. Ultimately, the man accepted the news and tried to re-establish contact. That's when he discovered that Jason controlled all communications. The only way to speak with Jessie was to call her boyfriend or the home phone. After each attempt, Jason would say she'd call back. Eventually, Jessie did indeed get in touch with her father. Months later, Gary finally met the suspicious young man in person when the couple visited Pascagoula. The father tried to convince his daughter not to return to Texas. He had a strong dislike for Lowe. That time, Jessie hugged him tighter than usual. When Gary asked if everything was okay, she said it was fine. She expressed her desire to make them proud, hence her need to leave. Persuading Jessie otherwise was impossible. Despite never showing signs of distress, her father had a bad feeling. After meeting with her, he wrote a song titled "Taken," dedicated to his daughter. 4 months after moving to Texas, she stopped responding to calls altogether. The final straw came on May 8th, when she failed to wish her mother and stepmother a happy Mother's Day, uncharacteristic of her. Gary sensed something terrible had happened, especially since she missed such a cherished family holiday. He called Jason, who claimed he didn't know Jessie's whereabouts. The boyfriend mentioned they were in an open relationship, allowing her to come and go as she pleased. Gary knew this to be false. Jason contradicted himself. He was very jealous and controlled every move. The next morning, the father headed to Texas, convinced of the boyfriend's involvement in his daughter's disappearance. En route, he messaged Lowe, "If Jessie isn't home when I arrive, you're in big trouble." Upon reaching their apartment, he found no trace of his daughter or her belongings. Yet, the boyfriend persisted he was unaware of her location and awaited her return. Later, Kimberly shared details Jessie confided during their rare heart-to-heart conversations. Apparently, Jason squandered money on prohibited substances and entertainment. His promises to fulfill the girl's dream evaporated. Largely, the boyfriend pretended to be someone he wasn't. This extended to his treatment of Jessie. Publicly, their relationship appeared one way, but in private, Jason could be rude and aggressive, leading to frequent conflicts between them. With Jessie missing from the house, Gary filed a missing person report with the Richardson police. Detective Hiram Hale, a father of 3 daughters, led the investigation into her disappearance. The man was determined to uncover the truth. Law enforcement officials acted immediately. They spoke with Lowe several times and inspected the house, but found no trace of the missing woman. During the conversation, the young man mentioned that he last saw her on May 8th around 10 a.m., leaving without explanation, possibly to visit her parents. He saw her get into her Acura car and drive away. Jason kept insisting that despite strong feelings, their relationship was non-committal. He claimed he didn't control her or pry into her personal life. However, investigators received information contradicting his statements. It turned out Jessie had sold her car 3 weeks earlier, a fact he surely knew since he was present at the sale. This raised questions for the investigators, prompting them to interrogate him again. On May 12th, during a subsequent search of his home, police found a strip of powder on a plate in the kitchen. The substance turned out to be cocaine. The investigation then focused on Lowe's garage and the vehicle inside it. Initially resistant, citing the garage was shared and needed others' permission for a search, Lowe eventually ceased his objections. Upon entering, officers immediately noticed a smell characteristic of crime. Jason Lowe's Audi was mud-splattered, and its bumper was detached. Police suspected that Jessie Bardwell might be inside the car. Although the vehicle was empty, the smell of decomposition intensified. Inside, they found the broken bumper and what appeared to be bloodstains in the trunk. When experts sprayed a luminol-based substance, the cargo area lit up with blue light. Blood, presumably belonging to the missing woman. Jason explained he got stuck in the mud while searching for his girlfriend, catching the bumper on a bush. He remained adamant about not knowing her whereabouts. He could not explain the blood in the car or the presence of controlled substances in his home. Experts concluded the amount of blood in the trunk indicated the woman was deceased. Given the circumstances, the case was reclassified as a homicide. To prevent the main suspect from fleeing, he was detained on charges related to the narcotic substances. During interrogation, Lowe persisted in his narrative. When shown a photo of his loved one, he refused to provide explanations, looking emotionlessly at the picture and suggesting he was being framed for something he didn't do. Eventually, despite the absence of a body, the suspect was charged with homicide. As the search for the young woman continued, a challenging and lengthy process in the vastness of Texas, with its many rivers, lakes, fields, and forests, where a body could easily be concealed, her family, friends, and sympathetic acquaintances held a memorial service. The event took place on the beach by the water Jessie loved. Everyone prayed for her to be found and for justice for her suffering. Their prayers were answered on May 19th when Jessica Bardwell was found deceased. Her loved ones at least had the chance to mourn her and say goodbye. Gary felt it necessary to review his daughter's autopsy report. He was appalled that his girl, wrapped in a sheet and barely recognizable as a human, was discarded like trash. Her body was returned to her hometown thanks to Gary's friends. Former colleagues hired and loaded Jessie into a funeral hearse. About 1,000 people visited the First United Methodist Church to pay their respects to the victim. Kitty Bardwell, Jessie's grandmother, confessed, "If this town could be cleansed with the tears shed for Jessie, it would truly be clean." The tragedy that struck their family garnered widespread attention, with many expressing sincere condolences for their premature loss, coming forward to support the Bardwells. A year had passed. Gary sat in McKinney Jail in Texas, still reluctantly cooperating with the investigation. However, 2 facts regarding Jessie's case were eventually extracted from him. Firstly, he claimed what happened to her was an accident, planning to reveal the details in court, hoping for the jury's understanding. This made it challenging for the prosecution to build their case during the trial, much to the delight of Andy Farkas, Lowe's attorney. Farkas staged a mock trial with outsiders acting as jurors. Based on the available evidence and Jason's confession, the mock trial regarding Jessica's case fell apart. 15 pseudo-jurors decided to acquit Lowe. Farkas hoped that knowing the truth, a real court would also deliver a not guilty verdict. Remember the anonymous tip about the victim's body location? It turned out that information came from Jason himself. This became another piece of evidence obtained during the investigation. The prosecution offered a deal to reduce his sentence by half if he disclosed Jessie's location. After deliberation and consultation with his lawyer, he agreed, requesting that the source of the information remain confidential until the trial. The deal was motivated by law enforcement's desire to allow Jessie's family to say goodbye and bury her body humanely. As time went on, the grief-stricken father longed for justice. To quell his raging fury, he once decided to take a unique approach. Gary printed a photo of Jason, placed it on a stump, and pounded it with a 12-pound sledgehammer. This form of psychological therapy offered him some, albeit small, relief. Mr. Bardwell confessed to struggling to get out of bed in the mornings, living with the hope that Lowe would soon face trial and be convicted for the murder of his only daughter. He blamed himself for what happened, regretting not convincing his daughter to stay or at least break up with her controlling boyfriend. Jessie once called her father, admitting he was right after arguing with Jason, who had kicked her out. She was sheltered by a new friend, but returned to her boyfriend the next day, giving him another chance. Gary had no choice but to accept his daughter's decision, a choice he would deeply regret later. When the trial finally began, Mr. Bardwell arrived in Texas, determined to achieve just punishment. Prosecutor Cynthia Walker began her opening statement by characterizing Jason. Most viewed him as a complex personality with few friends, mostly avoided due to his long history with controlled substances, often leading to uncontrollable rage. Perhaps Jessie was caught in one of these moments. Prosecutor Wes Wynn called Lowe's former girlfriends as witnesses. They confirmed the prosecution's claims about his aggression, sharing fears for their lives due to his jealousy-driven violence. Like with Jessie, he isolated them from family and friends, displaying clear manipulative and pathological lying traits. Hence, each ended their relationship, which was no easy feat, requiring caution and cunning. Conversely, Lowe showcased his superiority among men, effectively pulling the wool over people's eyes. Jason quickly responded to these court revelations. He disclosed starting substance use at 13, influenced by friends, leading to addiction. Nevertheless, he strived to not lose his way in life, achieving multiple degrees and working for a renowned global company. Lowe confessed his desire to fulfill Jessie's dream out of love, aiming to build a family with her. In contrast, the prosecution painted a picture of a man far from someone who had recently lost his beloved, and here's why. The investigation determined that the young woman's demise occurred between May 1st and May 3rd, presumably on the day when the Jordans, the couple's neighbors, last saw her alive. Following an argument that led to Jessie's demise, Jason moved her body to the garage and placed it in the trunk of his car, where it remained for several days. The blood traces found in the Audi indeed belonged to Jessie. He later transported her body to a remote farm and concealed it in the nearby woods. It was established that the sheet wrapping the body was part of Lowe's bedding set, which was still found in his home. Fearlessly using it even after Jessie's death, while her body was decomposing in the car, the accused continued to see other women. His phone was filled with corroborative messages and intimate photos, which he sent to these women before meeting them at his apartment. Jason explained that he was trying to distract himself and forget, often indulging in substance use, claiming it made dealing with reality easier. The investigation learned of Jason's presence at Jessie's time of death through a clever manipulation. As the suspect had long denied involvement, detectives asked Tommy Jordan, an acquaintance, to speak with Jason. During their monitored conversation, Lowe admitted he messed up and made a mistake, confessing to an unfortunate accident with Jessie and his guilt, albeit for criminal negligence. Law enforcement took this as a confession. Realizing the investigation was on to him, Jason struck a deal with the prosecution and disclosed the body's location. At the trial, he finally shared his version of events. That evening, he and Jessie took pills that enhanced libido and then became intimate in the shower. At one point, Jason slipped, followed by Jessie, who hit her head on the porcelain bathtub. She then sat down, complaining of feeling hot and dizzy. Jason claimed he offered to call an ambulance, but Jessie refused, suggesting rest and sleep would suffice. However, he found her unconscious the next morning, lying on his chest without breathing. Despite his attempts to revive her, Jessie was dead. Fearing being accused of homicide, he hesitated to call the police and decided to act on his own, initially leaving the body in his car. Days later, he resolved to hide the body on a remote farm, where he carelessly disposed of his former lover in a pile of trash without a proper burial. His story might have been believable if not for the defendant's character and the forensic medical examination findings. The woman had suffered cranial injuries, which couldn't have resulted from slaps to the face, indicating Jason attempted to conceal evidence of a beating. Thus, his entire narrative was fabricated. After a 6-hour deliberation, the jury found him guilty. Judge Scott Becker sentenced the criminal to 50 years in prison. The term could have been longer, up to 99 years, but was reduced due to Jason's deal with the prosecution as agreed. Lowe won't be eligible for parole until at least 2041. At the verdict announcement, Gary was relieved justice prevailed, yet he saw no remorse in the young man's eyes. Standing with the victim's father were Jason's ex-girlfriends. One, Chrissy Chambers, remarked that if she could say anything to Jessie, it would be, "Run, just save yourself." To this day, the convicted Lowe denies his guilt in the homicide, insisting it was an accident. The love of his life decayed in his car while he continued to live and entertain himself. Tragically, Jessie Bardwell saw the dark side of Jason Lowe too late. Daddy's girl hadn't realized how deceitful and brutal men could be, having always had a model of male integrity and care in her father Gary. Regrettably, scoundrels possess a peculiar charm, easily lying or embellishing to intrigue or enamor. This story is a cautionary tale that a woman must choose herself, her safety, and her freedom always and regardless. Otherwise, the story's end can be tragic not just for her but for her entire family. There are crimes that at first glance are difficult to assess unambiguously. On the one hand, the law of any state guarantees the inviolability of life and health of every person. In contrast, it is often opposed by the testimony of witnesses who minimize the guilt of the attacker. One such controversial case was the crime that occurred in the Mullenix family. Let's try to make sense of it together. Let's find out the reasons for the tension and weigh the responsibility of each person involved. Could it be that the victim is far from innocent? Or is her executioner a wolf in sheep's clothing? An unexpected discovery. On September 14, 2006, Newport Beach was troubled. A woman's body was discovered in a body of water. Apparently, the corpse had been wrapped in a sheet and then placed in a box. When exposed to the water, the unreliable wrapping fell apart and exposed what should have been hidden from view. The body floated to the surface after being in the water for no more than a day. Normally, warm water would speed up the decomposition process. Therefore, the appearance of the dead left much to be desired. Forensic medical examination established the cause of the woman's death was multiple stab wounds. In total, she received about 52 blows, one of which came directly to the eye. Specialists agreed that the injuries were caused by 3 different knives, which means there were at least 2 people who attacked the victim. Naturally, the victim had no identification on her, so the police had to work hard to find out her identity. Among the missing, the profile of the woman was not listed, and no new disappearances have been reported so far. Everything pointed to attempts to cover up the crime committed. Experts also determined that the woman had resorted to plastic surgery during her lifetime. She had breast augmentation. Since the identification of bodies by serial number of implants became a routine procedure, the identity of the murdered was soon established. She was 56-year-old Barbara Mullenix. Who is Barbara Mullenix? The future Mrs. Mullenix was born on May 29, 1950 in Munich, Germany. In her youth, she was very beautiful and sociable. Therefore, she was always in the center of attention. However, these qualities brought her not only success with the opposite sex, but also caused her a lot of trouble. At the age of 18, she was subjected to violence. The girl wanted to forget as quickly as possible what happened. But after a while, she learned about the pregnancy. To make an abortion, Barbara did not become. She decided to bear the child and give it to a good family. After a while, she got married. In the marriage, she gave birth to a son, Alex Hagwood. However, the marital relationship with her first husband did not last long. At the age of 35, Barbara's attention was attracted by Bruce Mullenix. The man recalled that she was a special woman and immediately liked him. She was characterized by straightforwardness and self-confidence. In November 1987, the couple married. Mr. Mullenix was younger than his wife for 9 years, but it was not particularly felt. Barbara knew how to arouse interest and liked to have fun. After moving to Oklahoma City, a daughter, Rachel, was born to the family. Everything was fine at first, but as time went on, problems began. In the evenings, Bruce could skip on a mug of beer and on weekends to drop in on friends. Barbara at first supported the company, but later became addicted to alcohol. Apparently, the events that occurred in her youth
left their imprint. Under the influence of alcohol, the woman, despite the parents' relationship with each other, they loved their daughter very much. They spoiled her and tried to please her in every way. While living in Oklahoma, before the divorce, Rachel had a large room while her father and mother lived in a small one. On the occasion of the girls' birthday parties were always held in the house. Miss Mullenix recalled that she was very close to her mother, even more so than most mothers and daughters. But such a close bond existed only when the woman was sober. The rest of the time, Rachel tried to stay away from her, made no attempt to even talk to her. Our relationship was generally good, but when Barbara drank, she got angry and crazy. She was the first one to get into a fight. Bruce confirmed what his daughter said. Since the house Mullenixoff was located near Hollywood, Barbara was in an extraordinary delight. She loved movies, especially singled out Gone with the Wind. A short time after the move, the woman managed to get a job as an extra. Hollywood dream come true. She felt that in time she would be offered a more serious role. But for now, together with her daughter, took an active part in the masses in movies and TV shows. The scene of the crime was established. Who is the culprit? Police officers could not understand why none of the relatives did not report the disappearance of the murdered woman. Soon, police officers Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright obtained a search warrant for Barbara's home. They hypothesized that since the woman was wrapped in a sheet, the crime could have occurred in bed. So the search for evidence had to begin at Mrs. Mullenix's residence. The police found no one at Barbara's house. At first glance, everything seemed to be in order. There were no visible signs of a crime. However, in one of the rooms on the second floor, a disassembled bed attracted attention. It was without a mattress. It only took a couple hours to reconstruct the scene. The detectives' assumptions had a real basis. Specialists found traces of blood on the walls. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to get rid of the evidence. The blood-stained mattress had apparently been destroyed. There was no doubt that the crime had taken place in this place. The police also believed that the owner of the house knew the perpetrator. Therefore, the first suspect was Mr. Mullenix. It was a strange coincidence that the man was out of town. In addition, just the day after the body was discovered, Bruce returned home. He explained that he was worried because his wife and daughter were not answering their phone calls. The man, of course, had a premonition of something wrong, but in no way expected to hear such a thing. Nevertheless, the news of Barbara's terrible death, the former spouse took it calmly. This also alerted the detectives, so they began to investigate the reason for his departure. Bruce said he was on a business trip. Mr. Mullenix's management confirmed his alibi. The investigation was back to square one. Daughter's love. When Rachel turned 17 years old, she met with Ian Allen. The guy was older than the girl by 4 years. Young people fell madly in love with each other. Ian supported Rachel in everything, even helped with household chores. At first, Barbara liked him. They even spent time together. They went for walks together. They went out together. In order for the lovers to meet freely, Rachel's parents got a special permit. Apparently, so required by law and police officers. Law enforcers often drew attention to the non-standard couple. The girl was allowed to be absent until 1 o'clock in the morning, but she often violated the established schedule, for which she was repeatedly under house arrest. After a while, Mrs. Mullenix noticed that her daughter's feelings were growing into something more. To make matters worse, the two announced that they had decided to get engaged. The move seemed too quick to Barbara. Ian and Rachel had only known each other for 3 months. Barbara didn't want to lose her daughter and the payments she received from her ex-husband. Barbara decided to increase her influence and discipline. Rachel was caught between two fires. She didn't want to offend her mother, whose control was only increasing. Ian, in turn, did not give way. So her mother and Ian began to compete for Rachel's attention. Rachel's fragile psyche suffered with every quarrel and altercation that arose between them. By the end of the summer of 2006, Ian and Barbara's relationship finally deteriorated. The younger Alan was afraid that Rachel's mother would convince her not to date him or forbid her from doing so at all. One day, When Rachel once again violated her schedule for coming home, Barbara exploded.
Despite the late hour, Mrs. Mullenix headed to the boyfriend's house and made a scandal. This situation really offended and angered Ian. It became clear to everyone that it couldn't go on like this. On the trail of the fugitives, Bruce was no longer suspected of killing his ex-wife. Detectives turned their attention to Rachel and Ian. Police found out that Barbara had been feeling lonely lately and was drinking a lot. It made her inadequate. Her daughter's attention was slipping away from her. She considered Ian an unworthy companion and Rachel a traitor. That's why Mrs. Mullenix often quarreled with them. Besides, no one knew where the lovers were. They never contacted each other. Given the complicated relationship between Barbara and Ian, the girl's father assumed that Ian was a criminal who was being sought. Rachel, in all likelihood, is not safe either. Otherwise, she would have made herself known, Mr. Mullenix pondered. The police began searching for the missing persons. The Allens' house was also searched. When the detectives checked Ian's computer, they found curious queries on the internet. The guy was researching the route of transportation to the city of Tampa, which is located in Florida. Bruce remembered that before moving in with him, Barbara and Rachel lived there. The couple was reported missing. All police stations in the country received bulletins with a description of the appearance of young people. In addition, the alleged suspect did not disappear without a trace. He left a decent trail behind him. Ian Allen's credit card was used to make a purchase at a gas station in Louisiana. That's also where a surveillance camera captured the guy's truck. Mr. Mullenix's fears were confirmed. Rachel was indeed with him. The only thing left to do was to intercept them. So officers Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright called their colleagues from the next town on the couple's route. Local police shut down highways in search of the van. Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix were soon caught. The kidnapping story. "Do you know I've been kidnapped?" Rachel shouted when apprehended. "What right did you have to arrest me, to throw me on the ground in handcuffs?" She continued, "I'm not a criminal for you to treat me like this." Detectives Joe and Steve waited for the moment when they could finally question the couple. 2 days later, they arrived at a Louisiana police station. Miss Mullenix insisted that she had not killed her mother. Once investigators pressed the girl, she blamed it on her boyfriend. Rachel claimed that Ian killed her mom and afterwards forced her to run away with him. The police asked for more details about what happened on September 13th, 2006. "I woke up to hear noises in the house. Then I realized that my mother was screaming a lot and calling for help. I rushed to her room. What I saw shocked me. Ian had attacked my mom with a knife. He was stabbing her over and over again. I jumped on him, tried to push him away. He was very strong, so he easily fought me back. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was in a kind of stupor." Rachel began her story. Afterwards, she added that the boyfriend forced her to help cover her tracks. He also insisted that she pack her mother's belongings into bags. Rachel claimed that by doing so, Ian wanted to stage Barbara's unexpected departure. At first, the detectives wanted to believe the girl. The shock she'd been through could send anyone into a state of frustration. But for some reason, the witness to the crime was overly justified. And afterwards, she fiercely insisted that she was not involved in the crime. Furthermore, there were no signs of resistance on Rachel's body. When communicating with Ian Allen, police officers found out an interesting fact. His girlfriend from time to time told about how hard it is for her to live with her mother, how intemperate the woman behaves when she drinks. Instead of reconciling the rivals, Rachel only increased Ian's negative feelings. Certainly some of the facts were true, but some of them were clearly exaggerated. That was why Ian was finally convinced that Barbara would not let them rest. Sometime after the night's quarrel at the Allen house, holding a grudge against Barbara, the lad headed for the Mullenix house. Rachel was under house arrest. I wanted to see her. I knew Barbara wouldn't let me in to see her, so I came secretly. I wanted to sneak into her room quietly, but Barbara spotted me. We got into an argument that escalated into threats. With the folding knife I always carry, I decided to scare her. As soon as the blade was at Mrs. Mullenix's throat, she started screaming. This made me angry and provoked an attack. Things got out of control. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Rachel really had nothing to do with it, Ian said about the incident. To the surprise of the investigators, the guy did not try to avoid responsibility and confess to everything. Over time, detectives became increasingly convinced that Rachel Mullenix was directly involved in the crime. Her boyfriend was clearly covering for her. CCTV footage from the gas station convenience store where the couple had stopped was scrutinized. Rachel was walking around the store looking for groceries. At that point, she could have safely called for help or run away. But for some reason, she didn't. Moreover, as it turned out later, the girl had the opportunity to call her father, but preferred to make a call to her friend. It was found that a couple of hours after the crime, Miss Mullenix sent a message to Ian Allen. "I love you," she wrote in her text. And that's how Rachel finally lost the trust of the investigation. Rachel's defense. It took 2 years to gather and analyze all the evidence in the Barbara Mullenix murder case. During that time, Rachel turned 19 years old. For any other girl, that's a great age. There is a whole life ahead of her. For young Mullenix, her future depended on the jury's verdict, and she tried to convince everyone of her innocence. When Rachel talked about her childhood, her face lit up. It was obvious that the tender years were happily spent. No doubt Barbara and Bruce had tried to make them so, despite many circumstances. Recalling their relationship with her mother, the daughter said that they were good. They were marred only by alcohol, which was abused by the murdered woman and the boyfriend who appeared over time. At school, I was known as a girl from a not very prosperous family with alcoholic parents. When my father drank, he was still himself. He was kind and considerate, which can't be said for my mom. She described the family atmosphere in court. Her words were confirmed by her friend Kelsey Douglas, who often visited the Mullenix family. Kelsey said that Rachel always tried to please her mother in everything, but apparently there came a point when she could no longer tolerate the harsh control and insults. She admitted to me that she had started drinking from time to time. Rachel didn't know what else to do. She had nowhere else to turn. The alcohol helped relieve tension, to forget for a while about family difficulties, Miss Douglas reported. Alex, Rachel's older brother, strangely enough, also stood up for Rachel. He considered her a victim rather than a murderer. That's why he refused to believe in her guilt to the last. He told the court that his sister had been a good and obedient child. She did well at school, practiced sports and ballet. As for the relationship between Barbara, Rachel, and Ian, Alex noted that at first they were great. All three spent a lot of time together. Barbara's eldest son also reported that their mother abused alcohol and illegal substances before her death. She took stimulants and tranquilizers and often threw loud parties. When Barbara realized that Rachel and her boyfriend wanted to distance themselves, she couldn't accept it. In addition, she found it difficult to get by on her own without alimony and maintenance money. All of this became a source of irritation. According to Alex, Mrs. Mullenix was a very controlling woman. She wanted to be in control of everything. With Rachel, she certainly went overboard in this. My mother loved to be the center of attention. With Ian coming into Rachel's life, her position shifted to the side, Alex summarized. In the involvement of his daughter in the murder of Barbara could not believe and the girl's father. He believed that she loved her mother very much and was incapable of hurting her. In all the time, Rachel did not accuse her mother of the weaknesses that were peculiar to her. She simply reported them as a fact. The girl repeatedly stated that she felt sorry for her. Barbara had a difficult life. About the relationship of her parents, Miss Mullenix recalled with bitterness. Rachel said that the slightest details in the behavior of his father drove his mother into a rage. Barbara often snapped at him, considered a spender. Rachel also told the court that she regretted her love for the young man. She made a big mistake when she started dating him. Their feelings brought discord to her relationship with her mother. Ian felt that my mom was a threat to him. He also wanted to control me like she did. My boyfriend wasn't ideal either. Often hurt and treated me like I was his property. I was torn between the two. Every time there was an argument with my mom, I shared about it. It made it easier for me to get over what happened, Rachel recalled. She concluded by adding that Ian did everything he could to prevent harm to what he thought was his. Prosecution's position Sonia Belest, the prosecutor involved in the case, did not believe Rachel's story. She claimed that the girl's angelic appearance was deceptive because she thought she was already smart enough for her age. Therefore, the position Miss Mullenix had chosen was thoroughly refuted. The officers who investigated supported the prosecutor in this. Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright believed that Rachel had some mental health issues. According to them, she was the meanest girl they had ever spoken to. During the interview, the prosecutor competently appealed the inconsistencies in Miss Mullenix's testimony. She inquired of Rachel why she never once called for help when she could have done so, to which the girl replied that she was confused and did not know how to behave in such a situation. The defendant also added that she was frightened by Ian's behavior, which was difficult to predict. The prosecutor drew attention to the fact that Rachel had not a single chance to escape. The girl's actions were atypical for a kidnapped victim. The prosecution believed that Miss Mullenix had not only attacked her mother herself, but had planned the crime in advance. When they tried to ask Rachel about the details of Ian's stabbing, Rachel was unable to answer. Her testimony changed and contradicted each other more than once. During the trial, the defendant stated that she was not present during the argument between Barbara and Ian. Allegedly, she simply left them in her room, hoping they would calm down. Only then did she hear screaming and the sounds of a struggle, after which she came running back and saw that the guy attacked her mom with a knife. However, Rachel's version did not coincide with the evidence that was found at the scene of the crime. The forensic report clearly established that Barbara's attacker was not alone. Specialists estimated that 5 minutes had been enough to kill the woman. Rachel continued to insist on her own innocence. Questions: why she didn't call emergency services, why she wrote a love text to the killer boyfriend, were frozen in the air unanswered. The forensic psychiatrist who worked with Miss Mullenix diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder. He believed she truly loved her mother, but she hated her equally as much. By the way, people with this kind of personality are prone to erratic behavior. It's often destructive to both the unsub and others. Bitter verdict. It took the jury 3 days to reach a final verdict. Ian Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. For Rachel Mullenix, the court's verdict was no consolation either. She was found to be involved in the death of her mother and qualified the act as first-degree murder. The girl was sentenced to life in prison. Her first chance for parole will come when the inmate turns about 41 years old. After the verdict was announced, the prosecutor said she was relieved. There is no question that Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix killed Barbara, Sonia Belest concluded. For a mother, such a death was a true betrayal. The day Barbara brought her daughter into the world, she signed her own death warrant. The child she loved immensely became her light and darkness at the same time. Undoubtedly, Mrs. Mullenix made many mistakes in her life. She was not an ideal mother, but she never abandoned her children to perdition. Barbara's jealousy and fear of being alone hardened the woman's already strong character. But people in love always have a choice. They could simply leave to preserve their right to their feelings. In time, things would have calmed down, relationships would have mended. Perhaps Barbara would have switched to something else, and the grandchildren Rachel and Ian would give her would be her outlet.
Acts committed foolishly and because of the young age sometimes can break the entire future life and have the most unpredictable, even tragic consequences. In the story known as the Case of Daisy Coleman, intertwined the fate of several young girls who became victims of their own naivety and carelessness. They believed that this will soon be forgotten and life will return to its former course, but they were wrong. Each of the schoolgirls was subjected to cruel bullying by classmates and those whom they used to consider friends. In 2016, a documentary called Audrey and Daisy told the stories of girls who were victims of violence and bullying. These stories took place in different places and at different times, and the girls did not even know each other. But the picture clearly showed that psychological violence is often more difficult to survive than physical violence. But let's start at the beginning. The Coleman family. It was a large, friendly, and quite happy family which could be called exemplary. They lived in the small town of Albany, Missouri. Spouses Michael and Melinda were married for many years and raised 4 children together: sons, Charlie, Tristan, and Logan, as well as a daughter, Daisy. She was the second child and the only girl in the family. Both parents worked in the medical field. Only Michael was a surgeon and his wife a veterinarian. They were considered respected people in their town. All family members were sports fans and cheered for local teams. In 2009, when Daisy was 12 years old, she and her father and older brother traveled by car to a neighboring town to attend a soccer game. However, the weather turned bad that day, and the car skidded on the wet road, resulting in a collision with a car that was traveling in the oncoming lane. The father of the family died on the spot, but the children fortunately were not seriously injured. The Coleman family was bereaved, and they soon decided to move to another city for a change of scenery. The family settled in Maryville, still in the same state of Missouri, where the children went to one of the local schools, and the mother got a job at a veterinary center. Gradually, they recovered from the loss and began to make plans for the future. Daisy was actively engaged in dancing and gymnastics, and was also a member of the school cheerleading team. In addition, the girl discovered another talent. She drew very beautifully and dreamed of becoming an artist or designer in the future. At school, she had many friends who characterized her as bright, kind, open, and cheerful. Daisy had a best friend named Paige, with whom they were practically inseparable. The girls went to school together, were on the same cheerleading team, and attended the same dance studio. They often stayed overnight at each other's houses, which became a common occurrence. On January 7th, 2012, when school was on winter break, Paige once again stayed overnight at her friend's house. They watched movies, ate sweets, and chatted. And when everyone went to bed, Daisy sneaked down to the home wine cabinet and stole a bottle of hot liquor from there, which she and her friend drank. After midnight, Daisy began texting a local hottie, 17-year-old Matthew Barnett, who was considered one of the most popular guys in school and was an up-and-coming soccer player. He was friends with her older brother, Charlie, with whom they were in the same class and often visited the Coleman family home. Daisy was flattered by the attention of a grown boy, and she was eager to chat and flirt with him. When she wrote that she was spending the night with a friend, Matthew invited the girls to a party at his house, suggesting that they have fun without their parents. They eagerly accepted his offer and quietly left the house, escaping through Daisy's bedroom window. Soon Matthew and his buddy came to pick them up, and the young men headed to his house, where several other kids from their school were waiting for them. Nightmare party. The party was held in the basement of the house, which the young people got into through the garage. As soon as Daisy and Paige went inside, they were offered alcoholic cocktails that the guys had made themselves. Matthew was particularly persistent. He poured Daisy one drink after another, and she drank it eagerly, trying to impress him. At one point, Paige tried to intervene because she thought her friend was already pretty drunk, but she was asked to stay out of it. At the party was a guy named Nicholas, whom Paige had long had a crush on. He approached her and started flirting with her. They drank together, and afterward, the high schooler offered her privacy in another room. Paige agreed, realizing what would happen next. Their intimacy didn't last long, and when they went back inside, Daisy wasn't in the large room. The door of the next room where the bed was slightly ajar, and Paige saw that her friend was lying there almost unconscious, and Matthew, taking advantage of her condition, had become intimate with her. In addition, another member of the party, named Jordan, was filming what was happening on his cell phone. As it later turned out, he also took advantage of Daisy's unconsciousness and had sexual intercourse with her. The boys put the girls in the car and drove them back to Daisy's house. Paige had sobered up a little by then, but her friend was still half conscious and unable to stand on her own. Soon, Daisy started throwing up, and the guys literally dragged her out of the car. While Daisy was vomiting, Matthew tried to gather her hair, but he was not doing a good job. Daisy's hair and clothes ended up soiled. The guys told Paige to go inside, and they would stay with her friend until she sobered up a bit. Paige believed them and went back into the room through the window without waking anyone. She laid down on the bed, and since she was still drunk, fell asleep right away. In fact, The boys tricked Paige, and as soon as she returned to the house, they left Daisy lying on the cold ground on a January night, having first taken off her jacket. They later explained their actions by saying that they were afraid someone would see them with a drunken minor and call the police. They allegedly took off the jacket because Daisy was vomiting and had soiled it. Apparently, Daisy lay outside in sub-zero temperatures for several hours before she came to her senses. According to her recollection, at first she thought she was dead because she couldn't feel her limbs, couldn't move or scream. She was also not wearing shoes or socks, but no one could explain where they had gone. Her wet hair was frozen to the lawn, and she had to make an effort to lift her head and look around. Daisy crawled to the doorstep of her own house and slammed her hand on the front door several times. Somehow Maline's mother woke up from the noise and, thinking it was the dog asking to come inside, went to open the door. Melinda almost lost her senses when she saw her daughter lying on the porch in a helpless and semi-conscious state, undressed and without shoes. The mother shouted and woke her sons, who immediately rushed over and helped to carry her sister into the house. She was wearing only a t-shirt and thin pants, and her limbs showed signs of frostbite. Daisy could not speak, but only sobbed occasionally. She was shaking violently and smelled of alcohol. At first, the mother tried to keep her daughter warm by wrapping her in blankets, but quickly realized that it wouldn't help, so she told her sons to carry her sister into the bathtub. There, Melinda began removing her daughter's clothes and saw that her thighs were covered on the inside with bruises and abrasions. She immediately realized that her daughter had been abused and called the police and medics. Until they arrived, the mother warmed Daisy with warm water. As a medical professional, she knew what to do in such cases to avoid harm and minimize the negative effects of frostbite. At the hospital, Daisy's condition raised serious concerns. Tests showed that her blood alcohol level was twice as high as normal. Her body showed signs of frostbite, as well as the consequences of rough intercourse with bruises and lacerations in the perineum. It was impossible to interrogate Daisy because the events of the previous night had been almost completely erased from her memory. Then the police decided to question Paige, who told them everything that had happened to them. The friends admitted that they took a bottle of alcohol in the home bar without permission, hoping that no one would notice it. The contents of the bottle they managed to drink, so when the guys invited them to their home, they were already drunk. Paige had told them about the intimacy and that Jordan had videotaped what Matthew had done to the unconscious Daisy. Now it was necessary to interrogate the guys, study the video, and find the victim's cell phone, which she didn't have with her. After searching the grounds of the house, the police found Daisy's gadget in the snow on the lawn. The phone saved her correspondence with Matthew, which was quite intimate. The very next day, all three boys were taken to the police station for questioning. Matthew confessed that he had organized a party in his house, to which he invited 2 girls. He confirmed that the girlfriends were already drunk when they came to them, but they, according to him, were aware of their actions, understood what was going on, and willingly agreed to everything. At first, Matthew categorically denied that he had bought Daisy a drink, but soon began to confuse his own testimony and confessed that he poured her alcohol to melt the ice in her heart. But he insisted that Daisy was conscious during the intimacy and that it was consensual, using contraception. Matthew went on to say that he drove Daisy and Paige home. Daisy felt sick, she was vomiting, and then he decided to take off her jacket so she wouldn't get dirty. Her shoes, he reasoned, she had taken off by herself for some reason. The young man assured that when he and his friends left, they were sure that Daisy had gone to her house. Jordan admitted that he filmed Matthew and Daisy's intimacy on his phone and even managed to show the video to a few friends, but then decided to delete it. Nicholas also admitted that he and Paige had sexual intercourse and noted that she was okay with it. After questioning, all 3 guys were taken into custody. Nicholas was the only one who did not deny, cooperated with the police, and confessed to everything, and was the first one who was immediately sent to a juvenile detention center. Detectives found the situation with his friends less clear-cut. The local sheriff sided with Matthew and even praised him for taking the girls home, but the sheriff deliberately omitted the fact that one of the friends was left in the cold in a semi-conscious state, previously undressed. Also, for some unknown reason, the video, which was filmed by Jordan, and which could have helped to shed light on the state in which Daisy was during the intimacy, was not even tried to restore, considering this detail irrelevant. Crucial to the trial was Daisy's testimony, which she gave on the very first day she was in hospital. She did not, as I said, remember the events of that night, but when asked by a police officer whether she herself could have offered intimacy in exchange for alcohol, Daisy allowed for that possibility. Later, Coleman denied this, saying she didn't hear the question and was still not well aware of what was going on. But this verbal trap allowed the charges against Matthew and Jordan to be dropped. In addition, as it turns out, Matthew Barnett's grandfather, who was once a police officer himself and later went into politics and became a state representative, became involved. Moreover, the sheriff, who empathized with the guys, noted in court that he did not consider the girls to be victims at all. In the end, the young men were acquitted and released from the courtroom. Physically, Daisy recovered a few weeks after those terrible events, but mentally, she remained a wreck. Daisy went back to school, hoping to return to a normal life, but instead of support and sympathy, she faced severe peer bullying. Most of the students took the side of the popular handsome Matthew, and Daisy and Paige were called liars and easy girls, ready to give themselves for a bottle of alcohol. Coleman was kicked off the school cheerleading squad and literally became a pariah everywhere she went, even though her brothers tried to stick up for her. Daisy regularly received anonymous calls and texts that were abusive or threatening, and her mother received similar messages. Her best friend and her mother stopped communicating because she was also a victim of bullying and had to transfer to another school. Gradually, Daisy fell into a deep depression, began to avoid any contact with others, and even tried to settle accounts with life. The last straw was the arson of the Coleman's house, after which they finally convinced themselves that it was simply not safe for them to stay in the city, and decided to move to another state, where Daisy could normally finish school. A few years later, when Daisy was already in college, an influential online publication publicized her story, and once again drew public interest in Daisy. This time, however, a host of people across the country, many of whom had experienced something similar or had also been victims of bullying, stepped forward to speak up for her. And soon, a documentary film, Audrey and Daisy, was made, raising the issue of violence, harassment, and bullying. The second character in the story was a girl named Audrey Pott, who lived in California. A similar story happened to her at about the same young age, after which she also became an outcast. The schoolgirl fell into a depression from which she could no longer get out of, and took her own life. Before leaving, she wrote on her internet page that her life was destroyed, and she saw no point in hanging on to it any longer. This documentary project and the public support it received inspired the Coleman family to continue to fight for justice and get the investigation reopened. This time, Matthew Barnett was still found guilty, but was sentenced to only 4 months of probation, and he also paid the victim a laughable amount of less than $2,000. After graduating from college, Daisy moved to Colorado, where she planned to start her life with a clean slate. She found a use for her talent as an artist, taking a job as a master at a tattoo parlor. At the same time, Daisy was offered to take part in another documentary project, and she readily accepted. For a while, it seemed to her that everything was getting better, but in the summer of 2018, trouble came to her family again. Mom and younger brother Tristan decided to visit Daisy and went to her by car. But on the way to another state, they got into a car accident, as a result of which the young man died on the spot, and Melinda was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. This tragedy undermined Daisy's already unstable emotional state. She became withdrawn again, didn't want to socialize with anyone, and withdrew into herself. On top of that, she learned that she would never be able to have children. She was saved from a desperate step only by her favorite work and creativity, and she reflected her pain and fears in drawings and sketches. Soon, Daisy began to complain that a stranger was stalking her. She again received threatening and abusive messages, but worst of all, he repeatedly came to her house. She began to feel as if a nightmare from her past life had returned to drive her completely insane. Coleman went to the police several times, talking about the mysterious stalker and that she felt threatened by him, but her statements went unheeded. In addition, Daisy discovered that the second key to her house was missing and assumed that the man stalking her had stolen it. On August 4, 2020, police arrived at Daisy's house, called by Melinda. She couldn't reach her daughter and assumed the worst, so she called for help, asking the police to drive over and see if everything was okay. Daisy was home and admitted she was very scared, but the police found no intruders, either in the house or nearby, and so quickly left. A couple hours later, Daisy called her boyfriend via video link. She was crying, talking about how she couldn't take it anymore, and then pulled a gun out of her desk drawer and shot herself.
The guy immediately reported the incident to the emergency services and went to his beloved, but it was too late. Daisy died at the age of 23. Daisy became the third member of the family to pass away prematurely. Her mother, Melinda, couldn't come to terms with the loss. She posted almost daily on social media reminiscing about her daughter, apologizing to her, and saying she wished she could take her pain on herself. A few months later, the 58-year-old woman left one last post with an old photo of all her children together. She admitted that she couldn't bear to live with the pain, and afterward she voluntarily left this world, shooting herself just as her daughter had done. Of the once large, loving, and happy family of 6, only brothers Charlie and Logan remained. When they wanted to take some of their sister's belongings as a memento of her, it turned out that the salon where she worked had been robbed and the albums with her exclusive sketches were stolen. As for Matthew Barnett, his life is quite successful now. He graduated from a prestigious college and decided to follow in the footsteps of his influential grandfather. When Matthew learned about the death of his mother and daughter Coleman, he dryly expressed his condolences on his page on the internet. "No story is more sorrowful in the world than the tale of Romeo and Juliet," concludes the Duke in the most famous story about two lovers. Yet in Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet end their lives by their own choice, while in our story, the young lover solves the problem differently. The creation of the Bordon family began in Missouri. Michael and Catherine met in school. They were classmates. Michael was captivated by his blonde, radiant, and responsive classmate. In the upper grades, he tried various ways to get her attention. He helped with homework and invited her out for walks. This way, they became best friends and spent a lot of time together, learning lessons and sharing secrets with each other. Gradually, their friendship turned into something more, and they realized they were in love with each other. Michael invited Catherine on a date, where he first declared his love. After some time, the young people got married. The wedding was a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where Michael and Catherine promised to love each other in all life circumstances. After 10 years of marriage, the family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Lititz was founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756, and it was inhabited by descendants of Moravian communities. The primary population of the town were faithful families who sought refuge in their oasis from the horrors of modern life. Life in the town was quiet and peaceful. Many families belonged to the Christian Amish community and led a lifestyle befitting a believer. Their life was simple, with people trying to do without many modern technologies. The Bordon family was deeply devout, so the choice of Lititz was no accident. This suburb seemed perfectly suited for the birth and upbringing of children. Life flowed so calmly that a new day was just like the last. This was precisely what the Bordons were looking for: complete family solitude and creation in solitude with God. Michael served in the local church community and taught lessons in Sunday school. Catherine primarily managed the household and assisted her husband in his work. In the community, Michael worked more for spiritual wealth. For everyday worldly needs, he had to work as a manager at a printing company. In the following years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families living in Lititz were large, with some having more than 5 children. Hoping to shield their children from the hardships and dangers of the larger world, families regularly attended church, while local teenagers joined youth groups and were homeschooled. Interactions between families were limited to joint religious societies and celebrations. The family idol created by Michael Bordon lasted for many years, with children being raised in faith and discipline. In the early 2000s, the eldest sons, having reached adulthood, went to university and moved to another city to study. This left 3 children at home who continued their homeschooling to the delight of their parents. Neighbors and the couple's few friends spoke highly of the children's upbringing and their diverse interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were exemplary, kind, and responsive. But it wasn't always this way. As the eldest daughter, Kara, entered her teenage years, it turned the family's traditional ways upside down. Despite her father's prohibitions, she began playing in the local soccer team, sneaking out to discos, and thoughtlessly doing everything she had been forbidden to do before. The young beauty's behavior deeply shook her father. Many hours of talks and instructions did not resonate in Kara's heart. Reasons for arguments appeared, which time and again led to the young rebel's escape. The girl openly showed interest in young men and sought relationships. Thus, in 2005, 18-year-old David and 14-year-old Kara met in a support group for students involved in homeschooling issues. The young people, with their passionate hearts attracted to all things forbidden, quickly established warm, friendly relations. Secretly from their parents, they agreed and created social media profiles, where they began actively exchanging messages. The correspondence was lengthy and very emotional. They exchanged well-encoded messages to keep their communications secret from everyone as long as possible. After a while, exchanging letters was not enough, and they began secretly meeting. At first, these were harmless walks in quiet, secluded places around the city. Then their friendly relationship evolved into a romantic one. They ran away together at night to discos and spent time together until morning. David was older and had already experienced first love and disappointment. Kara was so young that her new, bright feelings could hardly be contained. She didn't just walk, she seemed to fly, and a happy smile never left her beautiful face. Meeting David brought back the obedient Kara to her parents. Her father was overjoyed, believing that the teenage challenges were a thing of the past. But Michael was mistaken. Only the fear of being discovered by her parents quelled the girl's inner fire as she hid her love from them. This deeply saddened Kara. She knew what their reaction to such early relationships would be, as she had been instilled with entirely different concepts of possible love between a man and a woman from childhood, trying to protect her from such knowledge for as long as possible. Fearing their parents' negative reaction, the young couple carefully guarded their secret. But sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, unable to hold back, Kara shared her secret with her sister. She showed her a photo of David, shared how their relationship began, and that they were so in love and determined to be together against all odds that they were ready to run away. Her sister, fearful for Kara, told their mother about the planned elopement. Thus, the secret of the young lovers was revealed. One early morning, the young woman climbed through the window into the house and quietly, like a mouse, went up to her room. Elated, Kara was returning from another date with her David. She entered her room and froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed. Everything became clear without words. After breakfast, a conversation took place in which her parents forbade her any relationship with the young man. They were shocked, having shielded their children from violence, controlled substances, and other negative stories, that such misfortune had befallen them. Kara's father was so outraged and disappointed that he forbade her from leaving her room. That night, Kara Bordon spent in David's house. At 5:30 a.m., the young lover dropped her off near her house. They agreed that as soon as Kara safely returned to her room, she would send him a text message. However, the awaited message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara informed him that she was caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived at the appointed time. The conversation began with the father expressing deep indignation and forbidding the young man from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents' morals and stance were very conservative. They were categorically against relationships at their daughter's young age. Words of love did not touch the father's heart. He warned the young man that if he saw him with Kara again, he would be compelled to report him to the police for involvement with a minor. The lengthy, emotional conversation ended on a high note. Kara was locked in her room again, and David left with nothing. The young man got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or maybe out of hurt that he was not taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled greatly through the long days apart. They couldn't withstand the test of separation, so they devised a plan, deceive everyone by accepting Kara's father's conditions, pretend to break up, but continue their secret love, and they convincingly played the part of former lovers. In public places or at church, they didn't even greet each other. Kara's parents were appeased, convinced they had protected their daughter from a youthful mistake. David missed her terribly. In the evenings, he read Shakespeare, imagining openly serenading his beloved like Romeo. But in the Capulet and Montague tragedy, the lovers could not reconcile their families and receive their blessing. David Ludwig took decisive action. He called Kara's home asking for a meeting with her father. The young man was very serious and asked his beloved to talk about their upcoming marriage. On November 13, 2005, David Ludwig arrived at the Bordon residence for a talk with Michael, the father of his beloved Kara. He announced his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their plans to marry. Michael's response was dismissive. "That will never happen." Anticipating such a response and coming prepared, David, fueled by rage, drew a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was walking towards the front door. Then, David sought out Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting on a chair. David then searched for Kara in the house, calling out for her, but he couldn't find her. Afterwards, he got into his car and started to drive away when he saw Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car and told David she wanted to go as far away as possible, get married, and start a new life. The young couple fled the city in the boy's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with a young man who had just shown such brutality? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were considered good kids. How did they turn into criminals? Kara Bordon was reported missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Bordon, were found deceased. After reviewing surveillance footage, the police followed the trail of the teenagers. The footage also proved that Kara had not resisted but willingly accompanied David. Charges of abducting Kara were dropped against David Ludwig. Alerts were issued across the east as Pennsylvania and Indiana police investigated sightings of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. Authorities received a tip on Monday morning about a vehicle matching that description parked near a truck stop outside of Fort Wayne. Police headed to the area, but the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrols spotted the car around noon on I-70 in Belleville. David Ludwig merged onto the interstate, leaving them on a 5-mile chase at speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a 2-lane highway. State Trooper David Cox, who was involved in the pursuit, described Ludwig as extremely reckless and dangerous at that moment, causing multiple accidents like in an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a top national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had ended the lives of his girlfriend's parents and took her with him. It turned out the lovers planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney, commenting on the investigation, stated that the earlier abduction charge against the teenager would be dropped, but the charges for the demise of Michael and Catherine Bordon would remain. Ludwig and Kara Beth fled together after the incident and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. Cara Beth was not charged with any crime. David Ludwig was detained without bail on charges of ending lives and abduction. Cara Bordon was taken into the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the demise of the Bordons following a prolonged dispute. 14-year-old Cara Bordon faced no charges. On November 16th, David Ludwig was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. The failed Romeo confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm. "It was a deliberate act. I intended to shoot them if they got in our way, and I did." During the search of the young man's vehicle upon his arrest, no weapons were found. But when police visited Ludwig's home, they discovered 54 firearms. This arsenal belonged to Ludwig's father, a hunter who taught his son how to handle weapons. An 18-minute video from a laptop in his home showed Ludwig discussing plans for an armed invasion of another family's home, showing him bringing weapons into the house, though court documents state they abandoned this plan due to too many cars present. The police declared Cara Bordon a victim in the case, yet Ludwig filed court documents claiming surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. Ludwig did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of the young individual responsible for ending 2 adult lives in front of their children was brief, as detailed in court documents. Cara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. According to court documents, Caitlin saw Ludwig shoot her father, then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, presumably the one that took her mother's life. Ludwig then ran through the house calling for Cara, she told investigators. The couple's 9-year-old son ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David Ludwig entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Tuctaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. Thus, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years, and was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Cara Bordon has been under guardianship, represented by a legal counsel. In written statements published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Cara Bordon left with Ludwig of her own free will. Ludwig's lawyer reportedly stated that Cara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings show that Bordon had ample opportunity to escape. Cara admitted that she ran after Ludwig as he left her house. Cara Bordon simply wished to marry her beloved, David Ludwig. Cara Beth has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the district attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions, alongside Ludwig's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind, contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Cara Beth, amidst her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. The Bordon family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Mike and Katie are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Bordon family and Ludwig's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. Friends and neighbors recalled Cara Bordon as a joyful and sociable young girl, known for her babysitting in the neighborhood and her passion for soccer. Kevin Eschleman, executive pastor at Ephrata Community Church, noted her regular participation in youth group activities. However, underlying tensions between Kara and her parents were noted by Zimmerman, highlighting concerns over Kara's interest in boys. Samuel P. Lohr, a friend of Ludwig, disclosed to authorities their secret intimate relationship, marked by flirtatious electronic communications and inappropriate image exchanges, according to legal documents. Zimmerman mentioned a significant decision by Kara's parents to disconnect her internet service in response to her relationship with David, indicating their disapproval. The peaceful town was left in shock by the grim events that unfolded, resonating beyond the local community to wider circles, especially those involved in homeschooling. Friends of the family struggled to comprehend how such sheltered children could commit acts of grave severity. Officially, they weren't considered a couple due to parental disapproval of their relationship, shared Stephanie Mammon, a 16-year-old neighbor of the Bordon family. This incident underscores the dilemma where David Ludwig, faced with opposition, chose violence as a solution to his problems. David G. Ludwig's appeal for release was ultimately denied by the state appellate court, as announced by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office. Following his sentencing on June 20th, Ludwig underwent various assessments at Camp Hill before being moved to a state prison in Indiana County to start serving his life sentence for the taking the life of his girlfriend's parents. David Ludwig, at 19, was transferred on August 3rd to the State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove, announced by Susan Norton, spokesperson for the State Department of Corrections. The state chose the Indiana State Prison for Ludwig because of its youthful offender program. Designed for inmates aged 15 to 20, the program aims to teach self-responsibility, discipline, respect for others, and self-worth. According to the Department of Corrections, Pine Grove, opened in 2000, houses some of the state's most challenging young offenders in a therapeutic community setting. Inmates at Pine Grove start their day at 6:10 a.m. with a roll call, followed by a 6:30 a.m. workout session including squats, push-ups, and jogging in place. They return to their cells at 7:15 a.m. to get ready for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., with lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 4:20 p.m. The bulk of the day is filled with 4 hours of educational classes, ranging from culinary arts, business, computer drafting, heating and cooling system installation, to building maintenance, and 4 hours of personal life management skills training. Inmates also participate in a 90-day military-style leadership development program fostering honor, discipline, honesty, and respect. Transitioning from the county jail, where Ludwig earned his high school diploma, to the state correctional facility was a challenge for the young man, stated Merrill M. Spann, one of Ludwig's attorneys. He will also be amongst young people from the general population and will be able to have visitors. The change was difficult because the county jail was smaller, and he had gotten used to the environment, Spann said. The cost of housing an inmate at Pine Grove, which employs about 430 people, is approximately $120 a day. Mr. Ludwig will be assigned jobs such as janitorial work or food service, and he will engage in daily recreational and educational activities, Norton stated. Inmates can earn between 18 to 42 cents an hour working as carpenters, plumbers, cooks, and laborers. The money earned can be used to purchase clothing, footwear, food, and personal items at the prison commissary. Most of the 250 inmates at Pine Grove stay until they turn 22, after which they are transferred to adult prisons to serve the remainder of their sentences. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 consecutive life sentences for shooting Michael and Catherine Bordon in their home in November 2005 after they told him he could no longer see their 14-year-old daughter, Kara Bordon. In his latest petition, Ludwig referred to alleged issues, including being treated as a juvenile offender serving a life sentence. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which found life imprisonment for juvenile offenders to be unconstitutional. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently denied the request, agreeing with Lancaster County Judge David Ashworth, who previously deemed the challenge untimely and unfounded, according to the county prosecutor's office. Ashworth stated that Ludwig does not deserve the same consideration as minors because he was 18 and a half at the time of the tragedies. David Ludwig is currently incarcerated in Luzerne County. Cara Beth Bordon, the 14-year-old girlfriend of 18-year-old David Ludwig, who is accused of ending the lives of the Bordon parents and fleeing with her to Indiana, has reunited with her family in Pennsylvania. However, as CBS News correspondent Sharon Alfonsi reports, it remains unclear what role Cara Bordon may have played in the incident. According to Alfonsi, the police now view Bordon as a victim. She has not been arrested, which leaves open the possibility that she played a significant role in the unfolding events. Given her age of 14, there's also speculation about potential charges against Ludwig for involvement with a minor. Warwick Police Chief Richard F. Garipoli Jr. told CBS News, "Cara is upset, she's crying, she's 14 years old, and it seems we forget that. She's devastated. This has completely changed the fabric of our community," a Bordon neighbor involved in the memorial service told CBS News. "They were wonderful people and we'll miss them terribly. It's complete madness, absolute madness," said the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania coroner G. Gary Kirchner. "This isn't a Romeo and Juliet deal. It's much worse." Thus, a decision made in a moment of fury and desperation took 3 lives. Why do we say 3 when there are 2 victims? Having received 2 life sentences, 18-year-old David Ludwig will live out his days in prison, never again to make a choice independently and never to be free again. But is that truly living? The community long remembered this terrible story and couldn't understand how such positive children could so casually commit such evil. Unfortunately, homeschooling didn't prevent this horrific tragedy. Growing up and being educated in a Christian environment didn't stop the cruel act. Perhaps the parents, trusting in God and faith, missed something crucial in raising their children or failed to convey the important lessons of Christian faith effectively. Maybe they weren't fulfilling their parental duties adequately, not having heartfelt conversations with their children, or trusting each other enough to prevent their daughters' secret escapes and stop the quest for new experiences. Perhaps it would have been better to allow the children to live without mentioning the Almighty, still sharing with their children the life they themselves had lived at a young age, where there weren't so many restrictions and deprivations. Deciding for the children, parents eventually face disappointment from the decisions made later on. We can only speculate what might have prevented this tragedy. From all we've learned, one thing is clear: violence always leads to more violence. When we're taught to live with violence, we become good as long as we're coerced and accepted as part of life. The more we practice, the more we endure, and then use violence to solve our problems. Unfortunately, much of this acceptance of violence comes from Christian homes, but such violence is entirely against Christian teachings.